To the Weather Studio Live, I'm Aidan McGibbon.
And I'm Alex Deakin. We've swapped positions today. New season, we've flipped it around
I'm disoriented.
Yes, welcome along to the Weather Studio Live. It is Tuesday, it's 1 o'clock. We're broadcasting live from the Met Office and Claire is here.
Hello there, welcome to Tuesday. My goodness, I can't believe it's March already. Meteorological spring is with us, which is a good thing, I suppose. A little sunshine outside today. Is it going to last? Well, questions are still coming in about the stormy weather we've had over the last few weeks and what's happening for the next week or so. We'll be answering your questions. I'm going to get things off with a good one. In fact, we have a good guest today who will be able to answer that. It's from Tom Mosler, who's saying, was winter 2019-20 in the top 3 wettest? Well, hang on to your hats and we will answer that.
We certainly will, Claire, yes, because we have the stat man, Dr Mark McCarthy, friend of the snow. He's a friend of the snow, but he's also a friend of the show, and he's an absolute legend. He knows all the stats. He's also a climate scientist and will be able to answer all your questions about just how wet February was, just how wet the winter was. We will have him on in about 10 minutes or so. What else is coming up, Aidan?
Well, any signs of spring? We'll be looking at the extended weather forecast. Any signs of a pattern change from what we've seen relentlessly during the last few weeks and months. But first of all, let's take a look at some spring-like photos.
Yes, because the 1st of March was the first day of spring. Meteorologically speaking, other starts to spring are available, but here in weather world, we start spring on the 1st of March.
Which can't wait. Cannot wait to get it started. That's the reason behind that.
But of course, you can still get frozen precipitation in March, as you can, in fact, during any month of the year. And some great pictures here from a couple of days ago in mid-Wales of hail. These were taken by Tom Lowe, and actually some really wintry conditions here with this rime depositing of ice on surfaces. Really quite remarkable, beautiful scenes.
Yeah. I mean, we've not seen much of recently. Well, you don't see a lot of rime anyway, but anything wintry. Yeah. It's often the case, isn't it, that December is disappointingly mild and then March is disappointingly cold. When you're fed up with the winter, it just keeps throwing more wintry stuff at you.
It keeps on giving. Beautiful image here. I presume this was the thunderstorm. This was the CB that created the hail that we saw earlier, but fantastic image. This was in mid-Wales, but pictures of CBs right across the land through Sunday and Monday. This one taken at Huddersfield from a regular contributor to #LoveUKWeather J719. So thank you for that.
When you see clouds like this and they've got fuzzy tops like that, you know it's a cumulonimbus cloud. That means that this is entirely composed of ice crystals rather than water droplets. And so at the top of this cumulonimbus cloud, the air is so cold it's entirely ice crystals right at the top there.
And they're often a bit more squat in the winter, aren't they, as well, because the air's that much colder, so it doesn't have to go up as high for those ice crystals to form. So generally, cumulonimbus clouds are a little bit dumpier in winter than they are in summer.
Comparison of heights is crazy. I mean, in the winter, they'd be, say, up to 20,000 feet for the top of these clouds. In the tropics or in Europe in the summer, more like 50,000, 60,000 feet for the tops.
Speaking of Europe, just a taste of winter from around the globe. Some stats that we picked up on this week. Meteo France reporting it was the warmest winter on record across France. Again, winter being the months of December, January and February. Their records going back over 100 years. We'll have more on the UK stats in a moment with Dr Mark. No lying snow recorded in Helsinki throughout January and February, which is really remarkable. One of the snowiest, or one of the cities you imagine being covered in snow throughout winter. No snow lying recorded in Helsinki throughout January and February.
And very little in December. Maybe only the odd day.
And Moscow, 6 degrees above average.
Yeah. So their average winter temperature in Moscow is -6 for the average through those 3 months. This winter it's plus 0.2, the first time it's been above 0 for their winter average.
And let's move on to some other amazing scenes from around the world. This is literally breaking news, terrible news coming out of the United States. Tornado this morning that's reportedly caused some fatalities. Let's take a look at the video shot through the early hours in Nashville.
If you look at this area here, in just a few seconds or so, there are flashes of lightning, and then keep looking at this area here, and you'll just make out the tornado just about here. It keeps going, another flash there. Really scary scenes.
Blink and you miss it.
Huge, yeah.
Aidan and I had a discussion about whether to put this picture in or not. But Aidan was very excited.
I was for it.
So you were for it. I was like, people can't really see it, but yes, it's quite scary. That will be there. Where is it?
Here we go. Keep looking. There. And
there, this one. See a tornado. There we are. Pretty scary scenes from Nashville, and some before and after shots here. This is from Lady Lulu Louise on Twitter. Some before and after shots of that tornado that's affected Nashville this morning. This is incredible, isn't it? It looks like a movie set, doesn't it? Just terrible.
40 structures, at least 40 structures have been destroyed, apparently. Devastating scenes. And the tornado season officially has only just begun. It begins on the 1st of March, and we've already seen this occur.
Incredible, absolutely fantastic scenes, meteorologically speaking, but terrible news coming out in the United States this morning. Let's see if there's any questions coming in, Claire.
Well, actually, there's a few which I think Dr Mark McCarthy can answer, particularly when was the last mildest winter on record that we saw here in the UK? Something for Mark. Obviously, he's got all those numbers churning around in his head. Any chance of snow in London like we had last March? I think you're probably referring to the Beast from the East, which was, I can't believe it, 2 years ago now. And that was the end of February into early March.
I had my hair cut yesterday, and our hairdresser said, remember this time last year it was snowing? And I was like, no, it's 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago.
It's etched in our minds, it really is. And yes, are we going to get a decent summer? Again, something maybe for Dr Mark. You too.
Yes, we'll have him on in just a second. But first of all, let's take a look at the weather over the next few days. Remarkable scenes on the Met Office website at the moment. There aren't any warnings in force. Haven't been for over 24 hours now. It will be a bit icy tonight, the potential for some ice, but we don't have any national severe weather warnings in force. First time that's happened for a while. Worth pointing out, there are still flood warnings in force.
There are, and that's kind of the idea this week, is that the weather will be less wet, less windy, but still the potential to cause further disruption because of the antecedent conditions, because the ground is so saturated, rivers are so high. And so we've got more weather systems moving in, they're just not quite as bad as they have been. But yeah.
First of all, before we talk about our weather in detail, let's talk about Australia, because actually here we're going to see some pretty heavy rain. This little circulation is what's left of tropical cyclone Esther across the north there. Regularly get tropical cyclones this time of year, but this one's been quite remarkable. Made landfall last week and has kept going. Now, when we get tropical cyclones, hurricanes, the general rule of thumb is that once they've made landfall, they really fizzle out, they really weaken because they've lost their source of energy, because it's the warm waters that power them. But this one has just kept going. It's just been maintaining itself, just bringing an awful lot of heavy rain across northern parts of Australia. And this happens quite a bit in Australia. It's called the brown ocean effect. It's an area of ongoing research, really. It's not totally thoroughly understood because it's quite a rare phenomenon. But when these tropical cyclones just keep going over land, it's called a brown ocean because it's basically over brown land. And it requires the bottom layer, the bottom part of the atmosphere to maintain those tropical conditions. We also need a lot of moisture in the soil. The ground needs to be very moist, and it releases the latent heat, and that's what the heat source is for the low pressure.
It's almost self-sustaining, isn't it? Because it comes along, it wets the ground, and then you've got a hot, wet ground that then helps to continue to fuel that tropical cyclone. There's an Aboriginal word for it, which is agookabams. That's what these are called when these systems come in.
What's that again?
Agookabams.
Agookabams. You've been practicing.
Pretty sure I've nailed that.
Yeah, you have. That's impressive. So the Aboriginals were aware of these, have been aware of these kind of systems for many years. Agoogabams. Interesting thing about this, dropping a lot of rain across North Australia, but then it develops into a more typical low and heads south, and one of the reasons why I'm flagging this is going to bring a lot of heavy rain to the areas that have been affected, of course, by drought and flooding over recent months. Thankfully, it looks like most of the heavy rain, the torrential rain, will be well inland, not near really any inhabited areas. And of course, at this stage, it won't be a tropical cyclone, but it'll still be a low with tropical air mixed into it. So it's still going to bring a lot of heavy rain. But the good news is it's going to fall on that parched ground and, at least to a certain extent, help to dampen down the situation there now that they're going into meteorological autumn. But yeah, a lot of heavy rain expected across the southeast of the United States as that low drives its way south. As I said, it's not tropical anymore. It's now being dictated to by what's going on high up in the atmosphere. But really quite interesting, unusual phenomenon there in Australia.
From one extreme to the other, going from such dry conditions at the start of their summer to a much wetter end.
let's come back to the UK and look at our weather for the next couple of days, because as you were alluding to, Aidan, still dominated by low pressure, but actually things calming down a little bit out there this afternoon. And for the past couple of days, really, it's just been a case of sunshine and showers. Low pressure systems nearby, but there's just a little bump here, a tiny little ridge of high pressure, which is what I haven't seen one of those, a significant ridge of high pressure for quite some time. Moving in tonight, so that means largely clear skies. Let's put the cloud fields on. Largely clear skies, the showers fade away, and that does mean it's going to turn quite chilly overnight tonight. So there'll be a pretty extensive frost from northern England northwards. These are the temperatures in towns and cities at 10 o'clock this evening, so we will see those. We will see the temperatures falling away quite a lot across northern Britain, and with the showers across the north. Could just be a little bit icy here where we see any showers coming in, so there's the potential for it to turn a little icy. But it doesn't turn quite so cold in the southwest, because here we have a weather system moving in, and that's going to bring cloud and rain across the southwest overnight tonight, helping to keep the temperatures up. And then on Wednesday, it's a bit of a north-south split, really. This low pressure is in control. It's not particularly powerful, and the isobars are not especially close to each other, but this band of rain just moving around, pivoting around, and that is a bit of an area of uncertainty, just how far north this low pressure system is going to get as we go into Wednesday night.
You can see some snow, just a hint of some snow there, during Wednesday over the Welsh mountains, and perhaps some of the lumps and bumps across northern parts of the Midlands, depending on the exact track of that, because of course it's bumping into chilly air. Not cold enough to snow down to low levels, and not much anyway over hills, but yeah, just something to note there.
Peak District may see a little bit as well. But actually, where that weather front pivots is crucial, because obviously these are the areas that have suffered some of the worst flooding over January and over February. And although the rain isn't especially heavy, obviously it won't be particularly welcome. And there is a bit of uncertainty, because there's just a little ripple in the rainfall pattern you can see there. And some computer models are generating a low down here that kind of overtakes this one, is more potent, and could bring heavier rain across the south, and means the rain initially doesn't get as far north. So there is a bit of play. It's quite unusual situation for something only 24, 36 hours away. There's still a bit of uncertainty about the exact track of that low. And as I said, normally it's not a massive issue, but because of the uncertainty and because of the sensitivity of the ground, where we see that rainfall, again, potentially exacerbating flooding situation. But that does all move out of the way. Quite a lively low heading across the Pyrenees with some snow here if you're going skiing. And then we have this next weather system coming in. Again, a brief ridge of high pressure. Another weather system coming in Thursday night and into Friday. This one also looks quite lively initially, but as it comes across the UK, it kind of fizzles out. And so by Friday, we're just looking at kind of a couple of patches of rain working from west to east, something a bit drier and a bit brighter in behind that. So yes, thankfully this week the weather generally doesn't look as extreme, nothing too serious in terms of windfall. Yes, there will be some rain around. We're still being dictated to by low pressures, but nothing too intense. And generally on the chilly side, and particularly a cold morning tomorrow morning. Claire, how are we looking? Any more questions coming in?
Some lovely questions coming in, particularly to do with March. Gavin Wilcox on YouTube, hello there. Is it true we can experience 4 seasons in one day in March? Well, that's probably true in some respects. It's a transition from the winter to the proper spring. I noticed yesterday when I was out and about, little fair weather cumulus clouds, a real sign that early spring is with us. The sun is a lot stronger in March, but even so, all it takes is a good weather system coming in, the winds veering round to a northwesterly, and you get a real blast coming in yet again from the poles. So yes, we can in a way get 4 seasons in March. We still can get snow in March. We may even get some snow over the next few days, particularly over the hills. So that's quite an interesting question. The other one, referring to the tornadoes, is there any particular season for the tornadoes? Somebody on YouTube has asked that. And in fact, there is a tornado season which starts in April, goes through into the summer, and that's because the contrast from the cold, dry air coming from the Rockies clashes with some very moist air coming up from the Gulf. However, pretty much every month has a tornado outbreak of some shape or form. They tend to be more in the southwest through the winter months, but you can pretty much see them anywhere. So tornado season officially starts in April, but it can be earlier than that as well. Some people asking about snow, the snow last week, and obviously the snow, will there be any this week? And that's one thing we need to really point out, isn't it? It's like, it is still early March, it's still very cold, the risk of ice, but rain turning to snow, particularly over the hills.
Yes, there's no sign of any sort of heavy, widespread snow, certainly, as we've talked about before. You kind of need an easterly wind for that, or a northerly wind, and at the moment we're just getting westerly winds, which means we do see outbreaks of snow coming and going, but they never, A, they don't last very long, and B, they're mostly only really over hills because the ground just isn't cold enough, the air just isn't cold enough for any widespread snow. And the outlook even into next week is for westerly winds to dominate. It stays unsettled for the spells of wet and windy weather, it looks like. I'll have more on that in the 10-day trend tomorrow.
But yeah, big story this week is just how wet it's been recently. No surprise, you might be thinking. Let's get the full rundown of the February and winter stats. Statman Dr Mark McCarthy is here. Welcome back, Mark. Mark
Thanks
is
for
a
coming
regular.
on, Mark. You're very regular. First of all, you're not just the Statman, are you? What's your role here at the Met Office?
So I manage the National Climate Information Centre here at the Met Office. So we're responsible for monitoring UK weather and climate in the historical context.
Excellent.
Man.
There we go. The screen is now playing, and these are the headlines, basically, from both February. Actually, first of all, let's ask a question we always asked: why do we measure seasons the way we do? Why is it in 3-month sections? Why isn't the first of why isn't spring from the 21st of March, for example?
So, for meteorologically, well, there are a number of reasons, but we stick with the calendar months for periods, and we have a lot of historical records over which they were recorded for those calendar months. So we have a much richer and longer climatological record if we look at these calendar month periods. So for us, it's really convenient to work with those fixed calendar seasons, 3-month calendar seasons.
And if we went with the equinoxes, they actually do change days, don't they? So some people, astronomically, spring starts. It's not always the 21st of March. Sometimes it's the 20th, could be the 22nd. So they do move around a bit. So statistically, it's not as consistent as it is just taking months.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so let's look. I mean, February. The headline's all about February. The wettest February on record.
Yeah, and I guess that's not going to come as a surprise to a lot of people who were really impacted by how much rain fell during February. So it was 237%, so much more than twice the normal amount of rainfall that we'd expect to see during February.
I'll let him do it. Put the graphics together.
And well, as you can see here, so this is the map showing the proportion of average. So 200% is twice the normal rainfall that we would expect for the time of year. And these purple areas are showing areas that are more than 350%. So, and we did actually see some locations that exceeded 4 times their normal February rainfall.
4 times?
Yeah, so it's quite exceptional amounts of rainfall that fell during February.
It was we had an extra day in February this year, but actually we broke the February record, even not including that last day.
Yeah, that's right.
So it would have been the wettest February on record even.
Yes, it would have been even if it hadn't been a leap year this year. But again, we stick with the calendars, so 29-day February just has 29 days in it, so that's fine. But what's remarkable about this as well is that this February has also come in as the 5th wettest of any calendar month in our historical records. So we've got monthly national series back to 1884. The wettest month in that was October 1903, so a little while ago. The second wettest was December 2015, which a lot of people may also remember for some quite severe impact. And so February 2020 is coming 5th.
5th in all of those months, so close to 140 years worth times by 12 months. That's a big number of months, and this was 5th.
Yes.
And it's a shorter month.
Yeah,
it was, so it's pretty remarkable.
So it's remarkably wet for February, and it's also remarkably wet for any period of time, really.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at winter generally, because that was also wetter than average, as you'd expect, because February was so dominant. But it is worth pointing out that February was very dominant, because December and January weren't especially wet.
Not so much. So December slightly wetter than average. January about average. But we should remember that this is climatologically the wettest time of year. So an average January in the UK, as we all know, actually still feels pretty wet. So when we're looking at some of the impacts of the wet February, we've got to bear in mind that the fact that December and January were not exceptional. There was still a lot of rainfall, so it's still setting up the conditions. The ground is still wet because of the time of year, so that when that rainfall did, and that was following on from a wet autumn for many areas as well.
And end of summer as well.
So that sort of the antecedent conditions, the preceding conditions to February were also leading up to the fact that the ground was already wet before all of this rainfall fell. So
comes in as fifth.
So it's the fifth wettest winter overall
on record. And again, as record way over 100 years. And just to highlight there a few brown bits.
So this area around Aberdeenshire and North East Scotland and some of the North East coast, not quite so wet actually. They were particularly dry during January, slightly below average during January. But so it's not a universal picture, but very much dominated by the areas being wetter than.
And it wasn't just wet. Also, it was the fifth wettest winter on record, but also the temperatures were notable.
Yes. So also the fifth mildest winter on record. And I think one of the questions earlier was also looking at so for winter temperature. The mildest winter on record is actually 1989, but it's really worth noting that 2014, 2016, 2017, 2019 and 2020 winters are all in the top 10 mildest.
Wow, so five winters in the last decade have been in the top 10 overall.
Yes.
And again, that's going back 100.
And actually, if we think back to February of last year, we experienced the first 20-degree days in a winter month in the UK. So it was very mild back then. So we're seeing more of these very mild winters, and we are seeing that general trend of our warming climate in our winter records as well.
And just to end on it wasn't all doom and gloom note. It was a remarkable contrast with the amount of sunshine that people saw. Again, this is again for the whole winter, so December, January, February.
But actually this pattern was sort of broadly replicated in February as well. So the sunshine, this is again relative to average. So climatologically, obviously, the south is slightly sunnier because the day length is slightly longer. But we had this strong east-west contrast across the country. So again, this sort of area around North East Scotland was very sunny compared to normal. Whereas contrasting that to the western coast of Scotland, which was actually notably dull. And this is partly a consequence of the fact that where the weather was coming from over the course of the winter. So because we're very much in a westerly and southwesterly flow, these sort of western areas were getting a lot more of the cloud.
I think we can show that if we look at high up in the atmosphere and show this diagram now. This is again just for February, or the first 3 weeks of February. What are we looking at here? This kind of explains what the graphs that we've just seen.
So this is a measure of wind speeds high up in the atmosphere in the area known as the jet stream. So these brighter colours are picking out where that upper level jet stream is located during February. And so what we can see is that when sort of averaged across most of February, so this was up to the 25th, we can see it sort of tracking across the Atlantic and really lying right over the top of the UK. And this is associated with weather at ground level where we see it, because this is sort of directing the storm track and it's funneling those low pressure systems and that bad weather across the UK. And this pattern, this track, is somewhat sort of more southerly than climatologically. So normally we would typically expect the jet stream to be tracking slightly further north.
So this is showing the average position of the jet stream pretty much through the first 3.5 weeks of February. And right. that red core there where the jet stream is steering low pressure systems our way, low pressure systems bringing the rain. That's why February was so exceptionally wet.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, and sort of, typically we'd expect the jet stream to be located a bit further north.
I told you before.
No touching.
You're not touching the things today, are you? It's my turn. That's the reason why. And this is the anomaly of the rainfall.
This is the consequence. So again, this is data from colleagues in the US who provide something called the NSEP analysis. So it's an analysis, a global analysis, if you like, but we can use it to look at some of the larger scale patterns associated with this weather. So again, this is looking at the data up to the 25th of February. And it's showing the rainfall patterns across Europe now. And what we see is that actually it wasn't just the UK that was wet. So these blue areas, the blue and purple areas are those areas that were wetter than average. So most of Northern Europe was very wet. And in contrast, Southern Europe and the Mediterranean was much drier than average. And that's because a lot more of the storm systems were tracking across Northern Europe and bringing the rainfall to those regions. And this is also associated with a sort of mode of variability in our climate we refer to as the North Atlantic oscillation.
Yeah, we talked about it on the Wednesday Live before.
So that sort of reflects the north-south pressure gradient across the Atlantic. So related to, there's a climatological Icelandic low and an Azores high, and the relative strength of those two things. And so when the NAO is in what we would call a positive phase, the Icelandic low is deepened and the Azores high is higher,
and you get that.
Then we tend to be much more of a westerly, southwesterly flow over the UK, and we'll tend to see a stormier, windier, wetter, milder winter as a result.
And that could be linked to what's going on even higher up in the atmosphere and the polar jet, the stratospheric polar jet. That's been particularly strong this year, and that tends to dictate the jet stream lower down, and that also then flows. Yeah. So that's why we've just had these westerly winds throughout winter, and particularly strong during February. And we've had this repeating cycle.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Of wet weather coming in and coming in. Let's just look at that jet stream again, the average jet stream. You can really see that there. And actually, this is going up to the 25th of, but it's actually shifted a little further south right at the end of February, which is one of the reasons why France and Spain have now seen a number of low pressure systems bringing wet and windy weather to the Pyrenees. Okay, so the next big question is about climate, our changing climate. Is this consistent with our changing climate? Is it to do with climate change? Can you say this February is because of climate change?
Well, as we've sort of just explained, so there are everything's connected through the atmosphere, and there are strong meteorological reasons why we were having a particularly wet winter. But we have seen a cluster of particularly extreme rainfall events in recent years, so we don't have to go back very far to December 2015 and that winter, December of 2013-14, which was again exceptionally stormy and wet. And so while the variability in the climate system is an important part of that, we also know that our climate is changing. So these conditions are playing out in a warmer atmosphere, and there are certain factors like the fact that a warmer atmosphere is able to hold more moisture. So we can expect that some of these extremes might be even more extreme as a consequence of our changing climate. We have a growing body of evidence that actually further supports that. So we are seeing that the likelihood of certain types of rainfall extremes and these extreme events is increasing as a consequence of climate change, and we expect that to continue in the future. So the general picture is that for the UK, we do expect our winters to become wetter as a consequence of climate change.
And the warming as well, obviously.
Yes.
I mean, that's even more obvious, isn't it, that warming trend?
Yeah, so the warming trend, the signal is very apparent there. It's less obvious in the rainfall statistics because for the rainfall it's much more variable year to year,
much more
and it's very sensitive to these particular meteorological setups. So we can't just use the observations on their own to make conclusions about how our climate is affecting rainfall, but we do have a wealth of other science available to us by using our climate simulations and the climate modelling and our understanding of the physics behind those processes, that we can start to better quantify and understand some of those risks that we're now exposed to because of climate change.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Mark, for coming along again and explaining all the stats.
Yeah,
okay,
thank you very much, Mark. That's absolutely fantastic. Any more questions coming in,
Some
Claire?
really interesting questions. One about the stratosphere, which I believe you answered, and another one from Daniel Craig on Facebook. Is there a link between the mild winters and very wet winters? And Mark, I think, probably answered that very nicely, saying a predominance of depressions coming in from the west, a mild direction bringing with it cloud and rain. It does tend to keep temperatures up. When the air gets cold is when we have lighter breezes or winds coming in from a cold continent, or when there is no clouds, you get radiative cooling processes overnight. In fact, that's what we're likely to see tonight. It is going to turn a lot colder, probably the coldest night of the week so far.
Confirm whether or not that's the real Daniel Craig, James Bond?
I think it is actually.
Regular,
yeah,
isn't he?
I think it is. He likes to message us every week on Weather Studio Live. And Aidan Loftos, a great name, Aidan, as well as Loftos, obviously. How come the Met Office and Met Éireann did not name the last storm? Well, actually, I think we covered that last week, but just to reiterate, there's an etiquette when it comes to meteorological offices across the western part of Europe, all that get affected by deep depressions coming in from the Atlantic. And it's pretty much whoever names it first, that name sticks. However, I think greatest impacts for Storm Jorge was actually across the Republic of Ireland, but the Spanish did name it first, and so we respected that and we used that name. And in fact, this week, the French have named, I think, about 3 storms already, Carine, Leon, and now Miriam, and their criteria for naming storms is slightly different from what we do here in the Met Office. It's not impact-based, but warning-based. So when it's risen from a yellow warning to an amber and orange warning, then they name that storm. So it's slightly different here in the UK. And as Alex says, no warnings in force right now.
No, it's it's remarkable. Hasn't been that way for a while. It's always good to see. Thank you, Claire. Yes, the French have named a couple of other systems. You can see low pressure systems heading across parts of France the next couple of days. They're particularly sensitive over the Pyrenees, of course, where they will see some strong winds. But this is our weather system coming in on Friday. Touched on that a little bit earlier on. It is weakening as it comes through. And if we look at what's going on high up in the atmosphere, you can see the jet stream just driving to the south. They're not really powering that low pressure system on at all. However, further here up to the northwest, if we run through the system, an active jet could also spin up a new area of low pressure and push that up towards Iceland. So this is the dominant feature, it looks like, for our weather over the course of the weekend. Becoming quite intense as it heads up towards Iceland. A lot of isobars on the chart there. But ahead of it, actually, our weather, well, again, we've got a bit of a ridge of high pressure coming in. So this is the early hours of Saturday morning. If you just run through, yes, this weather front moves in, but it's fairly weak. I think for most parts of the UK, the weekend starts dry and fine. A little ridge of high pressure. Yeah. That low does dictate things beyond that. And we do have to watch that low developing and this weather front swinging across the country. So we are in for, if I just pause it there, take that off, put the rainfall on, that will bring a band of rain swinging across the country. It looks like Saturday night and into Sunday. But
huge
again,
uncertainty, isn't there?
yeah, I just wanted to emphasise there is a bit of uncertainty, quite a lot of uncertainties, a bit about Wednesday's weather, but also in particular about how that low develops. Some computer models actually have a ridge sitting across the UK, the American one for most of the weekend, keeping things dry. The EC model is different again in the handling of that and when we see the wet and windy weather. This is the most likely scenario. We are in for a wet and windy spell at some point, followed by showers. So Saturday at the moment looks like the drier day of the weekend. Weather front swing through, and then that opens the door beyond that to further low pressure systems. And guess what? Yes, the jet stream looking pretty active as we go into next week. The possibility of further low pressure systems coming in, and next week does generally look pretty wet and windy for most of next week. But there'll be more on that in the 10-day trend tomorrow.
Yep.
I can just get onto the...
let you press the buttons there.
I'll press the buttons. There we go. I've done
swap
it.
sides. You wouldn't see Ant and Dec swap sides, and this is why.
This is why we shouldn't do it. No. We shouldn't do it. Any more questions finally, Claire, coming in?
There's always those questions or comments on, particularly on YouTube, between those who focus on climate change as something real, those who are the deniers. And then we have a lovely comment from Flora, says, I hate named storms. That's my most controversial moment or comment of the day. So yes, thank you for that. And you can have an opinion about everything. Thank you for airing them on YouTube, Facebook, as well as Twitter. We'll try and answer a lot of questions. What we've been doing over the last few weeks is after the show, one of us will stand there and answer more questions. So don't feel that you are being ignored. And obviously, we want to know who is doing the 10-day trend.
It will be myself tomorrow.
You will be Alex tomorrow. And then these two guys are both featured on a Mostly Weather podcast, which was published today. And that's about mostly weathers and how authentic is weather in movies. So you can check that out on our podcast channel.
That was good fun. It was good fun recording that. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for sending your questions in. Do give us the thumbs up. Do tell your family and friends about the Weather Studio Live. We'll try and answer more questions. If you've got any ideas for what you'd like to see on the programme, do send them in to us as well. But that's it from us. Breaking news.
Just to apologise to my wife. I ate the fancy ham for lunch. I didn't realise it was meant for dinner. Had an angry text just before we came on. Quick update. She is now heading to the shops to buy some more fancy ham, so dinner has been saved.
This is good news. The dinner has been saved.
Oh, happy birthday to Aidan.
Yes.
Oh, don't mention that.
Next week.
It's next week, is it?
Next week. He's taking the whole week off, so he won't be on next week.
No.
Yes, because...
I'll be watching.
Good.
You're taking the whole week off?
Yes.
Anyway, shall we move on? I think we're finished.
Not a big birthday, though. Not a big one.
Birthday, just to clarify. Enough rambling. Thank you very much for watching.
Late 20s.
Do send in your questions, and we'll see you again next week. Goodbye.
Bye.